On Monday, the world received the shocking news of the death of retired General Colin Powell, who died at the age of 84 from complications of COVID-19. Powell was the first African-American U.S. Secretary of State whose leadership in 3 Republican administrations helped shape American defense and foreign policies in the last years of the 20th and early years of the 21st centuries. Powell was a distinguished and trailblazing professional soldier whose career took him from combat duty in Vietnam to becoming the first Black national security advisor during the reign of Ronald Reagan's presidency and the youngest and first African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President George H.W. Bush.
But I became friends with Colin Powell, who we just lost. Think of where Colin Powell is, not only a dear friend and a patriot, one of our great military leaders and a man of overwhelming decency. This is a guy born son of immigrants in New York City, raised in Harlem in the South Bronx, graduated from City College in New York. And he rose to the highest ranks not only in the military, but also in areas of foreign policy and statecraft. This is a guy, and we talk about it, who had teachers who looked at this African-American kid and said, you can do anything. So all I want to say to you, really, is don't underestimate what you do.
And I want to take just a second to express my deepest condolences to Alma, his wife, his son Michael, and the entire Powell family. The world lost one of the greatest leaders that we have ever witnessed. Alma lost a great husband, and the family lost a tremendous father. And I lost a tremendous personal friend and mentor. He has been my mentor for a number of years. He always made time for me, and I could always go to him with tough issues. He always had great counsel. We will certainly miss him. I feel as if I have a hole in my heart just learning of this just recently. First African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs, first African-American Secretary of State, a man who was respected around the globe and who will be, quite frankly, it is not possible to replace a Colin Powell. We will miss him. Again, my thoughts and prayers go out to the family, and we're deeply, deeply saddened to learn of this.
I'd like to say a few words about an extraordinary leader and a great man whom we lost today, Colin Powell. Secretary Powell was beloved here at the State Department at C Street and at our embassies and consulates around the world. He came to the State Department after a long and extraordinary career in the U.S. Armed Forces. He was General Powell, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, when he walked into the Oval Office to be sworn in as our nation's top diplomat. After that, he was Mr. Secretary. He gave the State Department the very best of his leadership, his experience, his patriotism. He gave us his decency, and the State Department loved him for it. Secretary Powell trusted the career workforce here. He empowered them. He made sure that the desk officer who knew a particular country or issue most deeply was the one who got to brief him or the president. He told his staff that they didn't need to worry about getting him fancy lunches. Hamburgers and hot dogs were just fine. When he hopped onto the elevator, he'd pull others on with him. He didn't bother with formalities. And he wasn't overly concerned with hierarchy either. He wanted to hear from everyone. He walked around the building, dropping into offices unannounced, asking what people needed, making sure they knew he was counting on them. Secretary Powell was, simply and completely, a leader.
Now joining us from the U.S. to discuss the distinguished life and times of Colin Powell, who coincidentally chaired the event at the Royal Albert Hall in London that gave birth to the Arise News channel, is Jamie E. Wright, a lawyer and political commentator who currently serves as a secretary to the board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Southern California, and chairs the Emerging Leaders Committee, which comprises of young adults aged 18 to 35 who are engaged in combating social injustice in communities of color. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you so much for your time.
Well, good morning, Jamie. Thank you for joining us on Arise News, the morning show. Quickly, what will you consider to be the main legacy of the late General Colin Powell?
You know, there are so many things, but I just want to point out that he really was the epitome of what the American dream can be. Coming from Jamaican immigrant parents, rising through the ranks to be a four-star general, and then becoming the first Black Secretary of State. That is an honor that one can't even dream to be bestowed upon him. And, you know, he was fallible like any other human being, but he rose to a level that most people can't even fathom. And I think that's what his legacy is.
And what do you make of his political legacy? So I want to split it from his military exploits as a general and his political legacy. What do you make of that? He could even have married both. He could have been the fourth American president to have served as a general, but obviously he declined to run for president. What do you make of his political legacy?
I think it was complicated for the time in which he served in the White House. There were some strategy decisions that people didn't necessarily agree about. There was the issue with Panama. There were some concerns around his responses during 9/11. But I think his legacy overall was very positive and very strong.
I mean, amongst that will be that famous speech by Colin Powell where he said there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and it turned out not to be true. Everybody always remembers that. What was that like for you?
You know, that's one of those things that when you think about war and when you think about strategy surrounding war and what you're trying to get your political environment to buy into, whether or not he believed that to be true or whether it was a statement that he made, I think he hung his hat on that in order for us to move forward with strategy that he had in mind. Again, I think that goes back to, you know, me stating that he was, of course, fallible. He wasn't perfect, but I think his legacy far exceeds that.
Well, I mean, you know, in his autobiography, which you wrote in 2012, it worked for me. He said that, you know, he expected that when he dies, that particular incident, February 2003 speech at the United Nations, will occupy a paragraph in his obituary when he dies. And he considers it a blot on his record, the worst mistake he felt that he made. Do you think that that has taken anything away significantly from his legacy? Because every report is talking about that incident.
I don't. What I'm seeing mostly in my news feed is what people are talking about, which is COVID-19 and vaccinations. I think that at this point, people are so focused on that they are not zoning in as closely on that. Maybe those who are more so involved in the political spectrum, involved in military strategy will focus in on that, but that's not the major thing that I'm seeing people talk about right now.
And I wanted to talk to you about his military legacy and how he shaped U.S. national security. How is that being phrased now?
You know, when someone transitions out of this world, I think it's people sort of hone in on the legacy that they leave in terms of them being firsts. And that's what I'm seeing people speak about, what he was able to accomplish being a four-star general. I'm seeing less about the blotches on his record regarding, you know, he made the statement that was inaccurate about there being weapons of mass destruction. I think what people are seeing him at is being a brilliant tactician that gave really strong advice to a Republican president at the time that he was in office, because those were the viewpoints that he stood for. I think the other thing that I see people sort of pivoting away from, because a lot of people in America do this, we don't talk about the deep strategy of a thing. We tend to talk about sort of the philosophical ideas that make him diverse and great. And, I'm seeing people talk about his speeches at Howard. And when he said, if you see a problem, be the agent that goes and fixes it. So that's what I'm seeing people discuss.
A man that has an interesting past, he was he lived in the Bronx, Jamaican immigrant, starting out of nothing, probably lived in the projects, grew up in the projects, but led, the army at the time where America was fighting a very crucial war, the Gulf War. Right. Let's talk about his person. It was said that some troops during the Gulf War said, it's easy for me to die for Colin Powell than to die for the American flag. That was something that exemplified his person. Let's talk about his person, his human touch, his personal touch, who he was. Did you ever meet him as a person?
I did not have the fortune to meet him, but from what I understand, General Powell was a person of great faith. He was a person of great moral value. He was not just defined by being a part of a party. He was so much bigger than that. And he also reached his hand back to stretch out to those who looked like him, to lend them a helping hand and bring them along. Again, I referenced the speech that he gave at the Howard commencement to say, my people, if you see a problem, go fix it. If you see something in your community, be the agent that makes the change. And I think that is one of the things that makes him sort of almost larger than life when you speak about him. Also, he was one of the people that endorsed Obama. That's very rare for someone who is part of a separate political party, Democrat versus Republican, to come out and do. But he was one of those who did.
Yes, in terms of his politics, you're absolutely correct. He was oscillating between the Republicans and the Democrats. So in other words, he wasn't dogmatic in terms of his choice. But you referred to COVID. And with regard to COVID, he was fully vaccinated. He was even supposed to take the booster shot last week. And then he took ill all of a sudden. Can you help put that more into context with regard to the global concern about COVID, the elderly, and the immunosuppressed?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, first of all, I want to say that, I find it rather distasteful and disgraceful that the focus on his death is strictly about COVID-19 and vaccination. But I think one of the important things to realize from the fact that he did transition after being fully vaccinated is the vaccine is not, it does not eradicate the virus. It is still a highly contagious virus that one can get. And in his case, he was already immune compromised. I've been seeing some people on social media blogs that are saying, well, you know what, he probably got it from someone who was unvaccinated. That's not necessarily true. He could have contracted COVID-19 from someone who was vaccinated. I'm someone who contracted COVID-19. I cannot tell you to this day where I got it from. No one in my home got it that lived with me. I was the only person who got it. But I think it's important for people to realize that while vaccination is important, there's also those who are immune compromised can still catch COVID-19, and it's still very deadly. And so just to keep yourself safe, keep your person safe, and be watchful at all times.
I mean, for a man who had such a long, storied career, it's really impossible to have an unblemished legacy. There must be some kind of stain somewhere. But that man was greatness personified. What do you think will be his lasting impact in terms of public service, in terms of how he will continue to inspire generations of Black people all over the world, specifically, and really all others who are in the military, who are in public service, who are in the diplomatic corps, everywhere? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you can be anything you want to be despite the background that you come from in a place like America. It doesn't matter that you were born in the Bronx, if you were born in the projects and your parents are being immigrants. I think that's one. I think two, you can rise through the ranks in a way with your head held high. And I think the other thing that's really important is sticking to sort of dogmatic principles of a party are not always the most practical thing to do. And when you see a person that you think can really lead, even if they don't necessarily agree with you, stretching out your hand across the aisle, the proverbial aisle, to reach out to them if you believe in them. And that's he did, particularly with his endorsement of Obama and his going back to Howard and giving speeches. And so I think that makes him so critical to the legacy and the fiber of African Americans, particularly those in public service and those who serve in the military, what he was able to accomplish being a 4-star general.
So what can young Americans and young people all over the world learn from his very unconventional life? Because you see, somebody sees a top general like that, they think he probably went to West Point, but he never went to West Point. You know, he couldn't get enough grades to get in there, but he still became that source of inspiration worldwide.
Character goes a long way. Some people say, where you went to school matters. We've evolved in the world that we're in. Yes, education is abundantly important, but it's so much more than that. It is the people you meet over time. It is those who watch you. It is the confidence that you exude. It's the relationships that you build. And that's how you rise in society. And I think young people, especially those who are attracted to social media, if you have a platform, build the platform and build your brand on that platform so people can see you. I think that's a great place. And look at somebody who had courage to do things that were not set in stone for somebody with his background, and take that mantle and run with it.
Okay, first Black National Security Advisor, first Black Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, first Black Secretary of State, and then, of course, that UN speech happened. Do you think that if that incident with regard to false information with regard to Iraq had not happened, it could probably have emerged as the first African-American president of the United States, although he would later support Barack Obama and also, Secretary Clinton, as she then was.
Do I think can you repeat the question again? I apologize. Can you repeat the question again? I missed some part of it.
Okay, I was saying, look, he achieved everything, this great American in his chosen line. Right. But what happened with regard to Iraqi war seemed to have robbed him of the opportunity to become the first Black U.S. president. Do you think that he could have made it if that UN speech accident did not occur?
I actually do. I think with having explained that he could have made it if he had chosen to. I don't think anybody who has, subsequently ran and won the United States presidency, at least that I can think of, has been without blemish and necessarily given information that they couldn't validate. I think if he had explained it as this was the information that I understood at the time based on the intelligence that I was receiving in my position, that he could have sort of cleaned that up. And I think that he could have ended up being, a viable candidate for presidency of the United States.
Well, his moment was actually in 1996 when the Republican Party thought he could beat Clinton. And according to a lot of polls, he could have. But he was a family man. Because of his wife and her preference to lead a private life, he didn't take that opportunity. So let's talk about Colin Powell, the husband and the father. What do we know about that? And the grandfather. What do we know about that? And send our love to the family who must be mourning so badly now.
Yeah, we know that he was a great man of faith and family, and his wife Alma, who everyone has spoken about, he spoke about her with a love and an endearment that you rarely hear people speak about. And we know that he was devoted to her, and he has been for 50 plus years, and he loved his grandchildren and he loved his children. And when you think about someone who's that committed to the family, you have to oftentimes wonder if some of the decision, obviously, there's the blemish on his record. Some people think that's why he didn't run for presidency. If some of his decision was based on the time that it would take away from his family, because the reality of it is time is something that you cannot get back. And so that may have been a big decision that factored into why he did not ultimately run. That, and I just don't think that being on a platform that's strictly Republican would have really worked for him, because he was someone that kind of stretched his arm across the aisle to bring people in of other political parties.
Right, and I'm sure he'll be greatly missed by Alma, which he described as his rock every time he got the chance to talk about his lovely wife. But let's talk about Colin Powell, what he stood for, and the world we have today. Antifa, Black Lives Matters, those issues still remain. A lot of people thought after Colin Powell was named, the chairman of Joint Chiefs in '91, that those ceilings would be shattered. A lot of people thought, First Secretary of State, those ceilings would be shattered. But as it is today, 2021 America, you still have very right-wing media. You still have Newsmax. You still have OAN. You still have Antifa. You still have cases around Black Lives Matter. You still have Robert E. Lee. That's using Tundu's words now, the zeitgeist of the American life as it is today. Those issues don't go away. You still have fight back against critical race theory. Colin Powell vis-a-vis the cascading decades of race relation in America. What say you?
Well, race relations in America is so much deeper than Colin Powell. I think after Colin Powell, people say, well, now we've had the first Black president. I think the problem is the core of America, and I think it's what some people don't want to kind of hone into, is that America was built on concept of racism, gender discrimination, and those who were not white land-owning individuals. And so, while people like Colin Powell can ascend through the ranks, those of us who were kind of, outside of that, we're fighting against a greater fight, and there's still kind of an iron curtain that divides us. So while Colin Powell could ascend, when somebody like a Colin Powell ascends to those levels, does he then have a platform where he can knock down all of the racism that comes behind him? And it takes more than just one person to do that. It takes an army. And that's what's happening with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter has been great about pushing against policing, but Black Lives Matter also has to enter into the boardrooms. It has to enter into the law firms. It has to enter into the hospitals, places where Black people are still suffering and disenfranchised. So while Colin Powell can be a great person that we point to, we also have to say, okay, will he be the last person that gets into this spot, or will there be a dozen Colin Powells that come after him?
Well, thank you very much, Jimmy Wright, for joining us on the Morning Show today. Thank you very much indeed.